Hello, hello, ladies. So let me ask you, are you tired of quick fixes? Are you tired of the promise and transformations that really leave you a little bit more disconnected from your body than ever before? Because these quick fixes and these promises are really not helping you to transform your health. Welcome to the Beyond Medicine Humanized Care for Women of Influence podcast, where me, Dr. Maria, and with my guests, we go deeper than just that surface level solution. I'm a functional integrative medicine physician specializing in women's health, metabolic dysfunction, and hormone balance, as well as mental wellness. In this podcast, we will uncover the root cause of insulin resistance, PCOS, thyroid dysfunction, adrenal issues, and we will explore how trauma, stress, and anxiety really impact our bodies and our overall well being. So, not only our physical health, but our health and our mind, our emotions, and our soul. Because your body is not a microwave. And maybe you have heard me say it before many times. It deserves personalized, compassionate care that honors its complexity. So let's embark on a journey to reclaim your health one conversation at a time. Today's episode, from sick girl to thriving woman, my own journey to health and healing. In this episode, I will share my personal story of transformation. It might become a little bit vulnerable, and that's okay because sometimes we also need the stories of vulnerability. From struggling with my own health to becoming a thriving woman that I am today, and how it shapes my approach to the humanized care that I provide to my patients. So, welcome. And I am so glad that you're here. So, let me tell you a story about my own health. As a child, I was a girl living with type 2 diabetes, asthma, where I was going from one doctor appointment to the next doctor appointment. I was like all the time sick. I remember getting hospitalized multiple times, going to the hospital, spending a week there instead of school like normal kids and with my friends because of my asthma was the first illness or disease that really started to control my life. Because of my asthma, I couldn't eat citrus food. And I love my oranges. I was born and raised in Puerto Rico. And my paternal grandfather had this beautiful land. And in that land, we had the big trees of oranges. And I would go and spend the summers with my grandparents in this small little town in the middle of the island. And one of the things that I would do is that I would take walks and think more like hikes in the mountains of Puerto Rico. And I would really like to eat that fresh, juicy, sweet orange. And it was not so much the orange that exacerbated my asthma, but it was the peeling of the orange, like the skin, that little, like when you open up and break the cess, that it releases like all of these chemicals that smells really good. And then we know that citrus has a really positive effect on your mood, right? It uplifts the mood. But with that, then came my sniffles, my cough, and my wheezing. So then I learned this trick where I would have somebody else peel the orange for me. And if they would peel the orange for me, I could still enjoy the orange and eat it. And my asthma symptoms would be a little bit better. But then I remember this one day that I went to my grandparents' land in the island, and there was this guava tree that was like full of guava. And when you think of guava, like a fresh guava, you might not think of it as being very citrusy, but that was not the case for me. So I remember picking up all of these fresh guavas and just eating them right pick from the tree. They were juicy, they were like tart. So they were not super sweet. They were not past, but they had this kind of like sweet and sour tartness to it. And I went into a binge eating. Yes, I binge eat fresh guavas. And I didn't know that this was going to have an effect on my breathing status. So, lo and behold, we went home. And the next day, I had this like asthma attack where I felt that no matter how hard I could breathe, and I really would try to like and breathe faster. It was like I couldn't feel the air going into my lungs. I remember that my entire family got into the car. At that time, we only had one car. My dad was the only one that would drive. And I remember my mom in the front looking at the back, looking to see how I was doing. She gave my older sister a fan of those at the old ones. And my sister would like fan me out. And they were just trying to give me more air, trying to give me more oxygen. My dad was trying to drive as fast as he could. Why they didn't call an ambulance, I do not know. Maybe because I was still conscious, or maybe because they didn't think that was needed. So they decided to drive me to the hospital. It was probably like a good 20 to 25-minute drive from where I was home. And we arrived to the pediatric hospital in Puerto Rico. And I got admitted to the emergency room. From the emergency room, I went up to what was going to be my room for the next 5 days. And there I was in the hospital once again. And being in the hospital as a kid is not fun. You are asked to lay in bed, even though that's not what kids want to do. Somebody else is telling you what to eat, and some of the food in the hospital really didn't taste that good. My mom would sleep in a chair. It was cold at nighttime. She was not sleeping well. I was not sleeping well. Nurses would come in the middle of the night to wake me up, to give me my medicines, to draw my blood. The respiratory therapist would come, would put the little machine to give me my breathing treatments. And every day, somebody from my pediatrics office, because it was a group of three different pediatricians, one of them would come, would check me to see how I was doing. Was I ready to go to a home or not? And then finally, I was ready to go home with all of these nice, juicy inhalers. And most of all, with the punishment of you cannot eat these foods because these foods exacerbate your asthma and your breathing status. And let me tell you something. We're talking about I wanted to eat cookies or ice cream. I just wanted to eat oranges and guava. Come on. I was a child and here I am. I want to eat fruits. And they were telling me these fruits are not good for you. So eventually I would play with my body and I would hide. I would hide from my parents. And I remember that I would actually hide behind the washer and the dryer. So if kids are listening to this, it is not safe to hide behind the washer and the dryer at home. But here I was, and I was doing it. And I did it as a way to experiment. So I would eat a little bit of lemon. Ooh, nothing happened. So maybe I can eat a little bit more. Ooh, nothing. And that was the way that I slowly tested, have I outgrown this allergy? Because reality was that in a way, my doctors didn't never think about, well, she might outgrow it. Let's test her. Let's see if she is ready. Maybe her body now is ready and can tolerate it. And my parents, after they had been scared like that to like health, they were not ready to do it either. They were not like, okay, well, let's have her test to see if she can eat these. So it was really be myself, being a rebel child. And then I actually discovered, okay, now I can eat oranges. Now I can eat citrus and lemons and guava. And nothing happened in my breathing status as well. So slowly I outgrew some of my food allergies and even thought I was still living in the same environment where contamination is real. And Puerto Rico do get the desert storms that exacerbate allergies. My body started to respond in a different way. So I was like, cool. Okay, life is good because now I can eat what I like. And I continue to grow. And one of the things that happened, and I want to mention all of these details because it will help you understand my health journey and how really sometimes we do not correlate events that are happening in our bodies and in our health and in our mind, but they're really affecting us. So, two kind of like different events or things that were happening as I was growing up. So one was I hit puberty at a really early age. I was only 8 years of age. I didn't know what I was. I was actually, it was the summer that I was going to my asthma camp. So one of the things that the Asthma Association in Puerto Rico does, because it's so prevalent, is that they have a camp for kids. And one of the things that I learned in this camp was actually how to like exercise, not only manage my asthma, but how could I be physically active without? I love to swim, and that's also where I play or learn how to play basketball. So it was a really cool camp. And I remember that summer, I was between third grade and fourth grade. It was that summer. I hit puberty. So I am this child that now has purity. And I want to mention a couple of other details so that you might understand. So I am the middle child. My mom has three girls. Of the three girls, I was the one who waited the most. And I was not what we call a macrosomic baby. I was not over 10 pounds, but I was the one who waited the most. And when you see the pictures of me growing up, people used to call me and my sister spaghetti and meatballs, my older sister being spaghetti and me being the meatball, which I want to say this, that's not something good. You should never allow anybody to call names on your kids. And most of all, in that sort of way where they're comparing the physical aspect of the body. But I hope that that paints a picture that, in a way, I was like this chubby, rounded baby. And that's how I grew up. Compared to my other sisters, I tended to be the one that was the more rounded, the more chubbier, the one that had a little bit more of body tissue. So after I hit puberty, at some point in fourth or fifth grade at the most, I was not older than that. I remember one day that my mom noticed a rash. And she's like, "What is this rash? Where did it come from?" And I'm like, "Well, I have no idea. I hadn't even noticed myself the rash." And this led to a cascade. So they took me to my pediatricians and they're like, well, we are not sure what this rash is. We're going to send her to a dermatologist. So here I go to the dermatologist. So I want you to understand, I was a child that went to a lot of doctor's appointments. I was a child that saw like a lot of specialists. I was not the typical child that just went to the doctor for their vaccines and maybe some sniffles here and there, some strep here and there, some ear infections here and there. No, I was like a sick child. The dermatologist did a biopsy, and I remember being in the cold table with my head down on my belly because the rash was in my back. It was actually in my buttocks. And I can hear my mom talking to the dermatologist and her doing the biopsy. Nobody really even asking me, hey, are you okay? Do you want to know what we're doing? Do you want to see? It was almost like if I was not part of it. And I think that sometimes with pediatric patients, we tend to do this, unfortunately. We address more of the parents because they do not know, they do not understand. But we're doing things and things are happening to their body. So to go back to the story, I then go back for my biopsy result. And there it was. One of the diagnoses that changed my life forever. I had insulin resistance. I had what was called type 2 diabetes, which type 2 diabetes was known as the diabetes of the old people. And you see, in my family, there were people with type 1 diabetes. My cousin has type 1 diabetes. And then I had an aunt that not only had type 1 diabetes, but because of type 1 diabetes, she had lost her sight. And all of a sudden, I am diagnosed with sugar problem. And my pediatrician was like, well, let's send her to the pediatric endocrinologist. And I remember this sweet old lady with white hair. She looked more like a grandmother. She was my pediatric endocrinologist. And again, she worked for the pediatric hospital where sometimes I went to the emergency room or I stayed in the hospital. So I was very well versed to the system and to the hospital. And I remember again when I went to this first visit, her speaking more to my mom than to me, and then writing in a prescription pad, giving it to my mom. And it was just all about do not eat the sugar, and she cannot eat simple white carbs. And they sent me home. That was it. That was it. So I had a diagnosis that changed my life completely. And that was the only help, the only assistance that I got. I then realized that what was written in the prescription pad was taken to my school. And in my school, I now was eating instead of fruit in the heavy syrup, they would give me a fresh fruit. And instead of whole milk, I had skim milk. And at home, it meant that my mom started to buy the sugar-free candy and the sugar-free this and the sugar-free that and artificial sweeteners. And hey, that's what I was told, right? So it started to do that. And again, as a child, I already knew that I could hide behind the washer and the dryer and eat things that I wanted. And my parents would never know. So I would do this from time to time with sugar. Or if I was in a family activity or in a family gathering, again, as a child, I wanted to eat the cake for the birthday and the ice cream. And I remember my maternal grandmother saying that I was going to go blind like my aunt. And again, when family members are using fear, are using judgment because spaghetti and meatball, and you're the meatball. That is not helpful. And if your family members are doing that, and if you have the capacity to put some boundaries or tell them, like, hey, that's not helpful. That's not the support that I need from you. I would highly encourage you to have these conversations that can be vulnerable and maybe even stir up some conflict. But I think that it's important. And nobody was having those conversations for me. My parents were not using their voice to tell my family members to stop telling me that I was going to go blonde or that I was the meatball of the family. And my parents probably didn't know better. But the reality is that did have an effect on my self esteem, my self worth, and how I saw my body and how I was taking care of myself. And it was not until one day I remember I went with my mom. I would usually would go with my mom to do grocery shopping. And I remember there was a stand of magazine. And in the stand of magazine, there was one in particular, I can't remember the name, but it was all about the colors and how, and it was really fruits and vegetables and how their different colors had different nutrients. And I remember that I was like so intrigued by it. So I was also a nerdy kid, as you can see. So I was very intrigued by it and I bought it. And this was my first introduction, if you want to call it, to like health and nutrition. And maybe I was already introduced to health, but probably not in the healthiest way. That was my first experience with nutrition. This magazine that had tomatoes and spoke about lycopene and had cabbage and mushrooms. And what I started to realize was like, wait, that's not what I am eating. What I am eating for breakfast is either bread, cereal, or eggs. What I am being fed at school is rice, bean, some whatever meat they had. And usually it was like a canned meat, processed meat, and then my fruit and my milk. We, from time to time, also were given chicken. And I remember it was like these really big pieces of chicken. So I wouldn't be surprised if they had all of these hormones that were injected into that. And then at home at nighttime for dinner, well, again, it was rice, beans, a piece of some sort of either meat or poultry, fish. And then my mom would make a lot of desserts. She would bake really good desserts because my dad loved it. So I started to realize, wait, there's something here. And that is how I slowly became a Puerto Rican that ate broccoli and mushroom, which are not staples in our diet. And then I started to exercise. I would put the old VCR videos and like Richard Simmons, which I know that now he has passed, but I started to work out with Richard Simmons. And as I grew older and I was a teenager, I then started to run and I would run around home. And it was really the exercise and the running that really started to change my metabolism and started to give me more energy. And that then my blood sugar level fasting started to become into the 80s. And this was something that I started to do by myself. My parents allowed me, at one point, my mom did take me to the doctor and thought that I had like an eating disorder or something. Because in Puerto Rico, traditionally, when you become thinner, that's actually seen as, oh, there might be a problem. You might be sick. So when you're thin, skinny, and I'm not saying that necessarily that's the best way to be or look, that equals health. But in Puerto Rico, that equals sickness to a lot of people. And she took me to, at that point, it was actually my family doctor. I was not going to the pediatrician anymore because I had, again, hit puberty and I had these adult diseases, which there's one more that I'm going to tell you about. And so I was already seeing a family doctor. I was like more adult. right? Because of my illnesses. And he really looked at my labs. He looked at what I was eating and what I was doing. And he told my mom, well, you know what? There's actually studies that show that when you reduce your calorie, you live longer. And her weight is still in the healthy range. And she's still eating balanced meals. And her blood work looks good. I don't think that there's a problem here. And sent my mom home. And I was like, okay, whoosh, because really changing the way that I ate and adding physical activity. And at that point, it was a lot of like cardio. And it was like the hard cardio, like running. And if I was doing something that was lower impact, I was doing it for a longer time. It was really that started to help me feel better. I had energy. I could focus at school. I didn't feel tired. I didn't feel like I needed to take a nap every time. And that was the way that I grew up. I grew up not only sick and not only needing medications and not only going to all of these doctor's appointments, but I really grew up with bad energy, what some people call bad energy. And it was because of my metabolic dysfunction. My body didn't have the good capacity to take the carbs and the fat, which is what helps your body produce energy. And part of it was because of the meals that were being served to me, which were the traditional Puerto Rican type of meals. So that was my journey when I was at the late elementary school and then into my teenage years. And something else that happened in my teenage years, which also introduced me to other healing modalities, was that I started to develop chronic back pain. I remember I couldn't sleep without crying. And my dad would come and he would pray with me and try to console me. And I remember I would need to sleep on the floor. So, one, the coolness of the floor helped, but then also having that kind of like hard surface that was flat. And then what I would do was that to relieve some of the pain, I would need to bend my knees and have my knees completely towards my belly. And I didn't understand why that helped relieve my pain. Now I know that it is because it actually reduces the pressure in my lower back. So again, here I am as a teenager. Great. I'm going to more doctors. So my family doctor sent me to a PMR physician, so physical medicine and rehabilitation. She evaluated me. I started doing physical therapy in her office. I started to do the, the oh, I forgot the name of it, the electrical stimulation of my muscles, and my pain was not getting better. So then she did an electromusculogram to see what was going on, and we did an MRI. So, yes, I was a child who got an MRI, and I had some herniated disc in my spine, it's specifically at L5. That was pretty significant. That by electromusculogram, which is this test where they put some needles into your muscle and they stimulate the muscle to see what's happening to the nerve. She then told my dad, well, she needs surgery. And at that time, we're talking about more than 20 years ago, right? Probably like 30, closer to 30. I'm 42 right now. So maybe 25. And in that time, the surgeries and the success of the surgeries were not the same as today. There was a lot going on. And my dad thought about it, and my dad made the decision that I was not going to have surgery. And I was like, oh my God. So now what do I do? And that's when, remember, I used to run. That's when I started to do some more gentle practices for my body. One of them being yoga. And it was really practicing yoga and then doing longer walks, mixing that with doing some like runs and walking. So, like run and walking intervals. And then understanding how food also played a role into inflammation, that I really started to heal. And To this day, I still, if I do certain movements, I work standing most of the day. I have to be really aware of how my desk is set up. Because if not, I am still going to get that shooting pain that goes all the way to my pinky finger and then down my buttocks all the way towards my pinky toe. And if I get the pain and it gets exacerbated and lasts a couple of days, I learn the effect of having massage therapy at least once a month. I have also done some cupping and acupuncture because those things help my body heal and not have of the symptoms. If you still do the MRI, if you still do the x-rays, I probably still have, I not probably, I do. I do still have the deviation of the spine and I still have the herniated disc, and it is what it is. But I want to share this with you because my health journey as a child and as a teenager really has been one of the things that has impacted the way that I treat my patients. One, I understand the importance of actually talking to my patients. And if there's like another family member, don't assume that necessarily the patient doesn't understand. So many times we think the patients do not understand, the patients do not know. And then what we do is that we actually disempower patients. The other thing that I learned in my health journey as a child and as a teenager, growing up with asthma, diabetes, chronic back pain, was the importance of food. And when I was going to all of these doctors, having seen the specialists, having all of these interventions, being in the hospital, having MRIs, people talking even about surgery, nobody was talking to me about food and how food could really help my body start to heal from the inside. So that's one of the big tools that I use because after all, we do have to eat. So why not eat food that can really help your body heal from the inside out? The other thing that I learned in my own journey is that you want to move. You want your body to move. As a child, yes, we would walk to school. And that was probably maybe like a 15 to 20-minute walk. I don't think that it was that long because, again, there was only one car at home. It was my dad. My dad would drive. He would use it to go to work. So my mom would go walking with us to school. And you might say, well, that's movement. But what I learned was that for my body, that was not enough. For my body that had metabolic dysfunction, if I then was sitting at school for 8 hours and then I would come home and sit to do work and then sit to watch TV, that was not making any good for my body. And then finally, I also learned this balance between hitting it hard and then doing some yoga and stretching and using that yoga and breath to really help my body move away from pain and be functional in spite of the biology still being the same. I still have the deviation of the spine. I still have the herniated disc. That is there. So in a way, I kind of like learned how to biohack myself, and I did it in my own little way. I learned that you probably don't want to hide behind the washer and the dryer to hide and eat foods that other people are not telling you to eat. I learned that it's not good to compare and to call one spaghetti and the other one meatball. And that really affects the relationship that people start to develop with their body. And if you develop contempt again your own body because your body's not good, because good is the spaghetti. And one of the things that I didn't learn growing up, but that I do want to mention without going into a lot of the details of the story, because this story is a story of my family and they're not here. But I didn't learn growing up, I didn't understand the impact that trauma was having in my health. And maybe you know what adverse childhood events are. Maybe you don't. And I can put a link in the notes of the podcast so that you can just go and do your own survey about this. But these are events that children are exposed to: violence, incarceration of a parent that might have an addiction. And these different events, there's a lot of research and evidence that has shown that it does affect health. And we understand how it affects the health years after. You develop autoimmune diseases, you develop obesity. And I think that part of what we have missed is actually how it affects even the health of a child. I'm not going to go into a lot of details because, again, this is my family's story. But what I can say is that my score of adverse childhood events is really high. I think it's 8, if I'm not mistaken. So, pretty high if you understand any of this. And I think that one of the reasons why my body continued to have biological illness, why I continued to go and suffered and go to all of these appointments. One of the big reasons was not only like the food and I was not moving. I really strongly believe with what now I understand about trauma and the impact that trauma has in the brain and in the body, the inflammation, how the immune system changes, was actually was that I also grew up in a very chaotic environment. And I think that's one of the reasons that now, as an adult, I try to move away from certain things that I just call drama that I have noticed throw my body into fight, flight. I feel tension. I start to feel like the anxiety, my stomach wants to like a diarrhea, or my heart palpitations, my psoriasis of the hand. When I start to feel my body respond from that way, I know, wait, these are environments or relationships that are not safe and that will have an impact in my body. So that is my story, my health journey. My name is Dr. Maria. I am the owner of Salud Revisited, where I help women and their teenage daughters heal naturally, reduce their use of medications, and specifically address their metabolic, hormonal, and mental health. I see patients in person in Houston, and I see patients virtually from Texas, Arizona, Colorado, and Washington. So I will put all the links in the show note. I hope that you come back and listen to more episodes. And most of all, that if you have questions, I want you to, one, send those questions to me. And two, if the podcast and the YouTube videos are really helping you have a different vision about your health. And that's why my clinic and my business is called Salud, which is health, and revisit it because we're going back to see really what health means. If you are loving the podcast, please leave a review, because when you leave a review, that also helps me. And then the podcast can be found by many other people that I know that need this information and need this message. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Until next time. Bye.